My name is Nancy, and at 67 years old, I never imagined my son Timothy would betray me so publicly. I dedicated my entire life to him, worked multiple jobs, and sacrificed everything to give him opportunities one never had. That family barbecue was supposed to be a celebration, but instead, it became the day he pushed me into a pool to impress his in-laws. The humiliation burned worse than the chlorine in my eyes, but what happened an hour later left everyone speechless. Before I share my story, I would love to know where you're watching from. Take a second to hit that like button, and subscribe if you want to hear more stories about standing up for yourself. I became a single mother when Timothy was just 3 years old. His father, Daniel, walked out on us after claiming he wasn't cut out for family life. Looking back, his departure was a blessing in disguise, though it certainly didn't feel that way at the time. I was 32, terrified, and suddenly solely responsible for a toddler with big brown eyes who depended on me for everything. Those early years tested every ounce of my strength. I worked as a receptionist at a dental office during the day, then waited tables at a local diner 4 nights a week. On weekends, I cleaned houses for extra cash. Sleep became a luxury I rarely enjoyed. My mother, Margaret, helped with childcare when she could, but her own health issues limited how much she could do. Despite the exhaustion, Timothy became my purpose. He was remarkably bright, reading before kindergarten and excelling in mathematics. His teachers consistently praised his intelligence, though occasionally mentioned his sense of entitlement. I admittedly spoiled him when I could, perhaps to compensate for his father's absence or my frequent work hours. During elementary school, we developed special rituals that bonded us. Sunday mornings meant pancakes shaped like animals. Wednesday evenings were for board games. I attended every school event, science fair, and parent-teacher conference, often rearranging my work schedule or sacrificing sleep to be present. Timothy would beam with pride when he spotted me in the audience during his school performances. High school brought typical teenage rebellion, but our core relationship remained strong. When college application time arrived, Timothy set his sights on Westbridge University, a prestigious private school with an exceptional business program. The tuition was astronomical, far beyond what my savings or income could cover. Without telling Timothy, I sold my parents' home that I had inherited. The house represented my only financial security, but his education seemed more important at the time. Those college years transformed Timothy. He joined a fraternity, made connections with wealthy students, and developed refined tastes that I couldn't relate to. During holiday breaks, he'd share stories about friends vacationing in Europe or sailing on family yachts. I noticed him occasionally wincing at my modest home or simple meals, though he tried to hide his reactions. After graduation, Timothy landed an entry-level position at Lambert Financial Services. I helped him with the down payment on his first condo, depleting what remained of my savings. I told myself it was an investment in his future, that a mother's role was to give selflessly. 5 years ago, Timothy met Melissa at a charity gala. She came from an affluent family. Her father owned a chain of luxury car dealerships, and her mother's family had old money tied to real estate. Melissa was beautiful, well-educated, and initially quite warm toward me. During their first year of dating, she would invite me to Sunday brunches and ask about Timothy's childhood. Their wedding was an elaborate affair at the Westbrook Country Club. Melissa's parents spared no expense, and I felt painfully out of place among the designer dresses and sophisticated conversations. Timothy seemed increasingly conscious of the differences between his new in-laws and me. He introduced me to their friends with brief, almost dismissive explanations, quickly steering conversations away from questions about my work or background. After they married, our relationship began changing in subtle but unmistakable ways. Phone calls became less frequent. Timothy often mentioned being swamped with work commitments when I suggested visits. When we did get together, Melissa's parents frequently joined us, creating an uncomfortable dynamic where I felt constantly judged for my modest clothing or occasionally incorrect use of formal dining etiquette. Last year, Timothy received a significant promotion to senior investment manager. They moved to Lakeside Heights, an exclusive neighborhood where homes started at 7 figures. During my first visit to their new house, Timothy gave me a brief tour that felt more like instructions, which guest room would be mine, which bathroom to use, areas where I should feel free to relax, implying others were off-limits. I noticed him becoming increasingly embarrassed by my middle-class mannerisms. When I brought homemade cookies to a dinner party they hosted, he quickly transferred them to one of their crystal serving dishes, discarding my plastic container before guests arrived. When I mentioned couponing to Melissa's mother Eleanor, Timothy quickly changed the subject, later suggesting I avoid money talk around her family. Still, I persisted in trying to maintain our relationship. I took etiquette classes at the community center, updated my wardrobe as much as my budget allowed, and practiced conversation topics I thought would interest his new social circle. I wanted desperately to fit into Timothy's new life, even as I felt him pulling away. The week before the barbecue, Timothy called to extend the invitation. His tone suggested obligation rather than genuine desire for my presence, but I eagerly accepted anyway. I hadn't seen their new backyard since the landscaping was completed, and I missed my son desperately. Little did I know that this gathering would become a turning point in our relationship, one that would expose truths I had been avoiding for years. The morning of the barbecue, I woke up with butterflies in my stomach. This would be my first time meeting several of Timothy and Melissa's neighbors, as well as some of Timothy's colleagues from Lambert Financial. More importantly, Melissa's parents, Eleanor and Richard, would be attending. Despite having met them multiple times over the years, I never felt they approved of me as their daughter's mother-in-law. I spent extra time getting ready, putting on the new blouse I'd purchased specifically for the occasion, a light blue button-up that the store clerk assured me was classic and appropriate for summer gatherings. I styled my gray hair carefully and applied subtle makeup. In my bathroom mirror, I practiced natural-looking smiles and rehearsed conversation starters about neutral topics like gardening and travel. Before leaving, I prepared my famous potato salad, Timothy's favorite since childhood. He'd always request it for his birthday dinners, scraping the bowl clean and declaring nobody made it like his mom. I packed the salad in my best serving bowl, covering it carefully for the journey to Lakeside Heights. I arrived 30 minutes early, hoping to help with preparations. Timothy answered the door with a phone pressed to his ear, gesturing me inside with minimal acknowledgement. The house smelled of cleaning products and fresh flowers. Through the sliding glass doors, I could see the caterers setting up serving stations around the pool area. This was far from the casual family barbecue I had envisioned. "Mom, you're early," Timothy said after finishing his call, checking his watch with a frown. "I thought I could help set up," I explained, holding up my potato salad. "And I brought your favorite." Timothy glanced at the bowl, his expression unreadable. "The caterers have everything handled, and we've got a full menu planned already." "Oh well, perhaps just a small bowl for those who might want to try it," I suggested, trying to hide my disappointment. He took the container with a sigh. "I'll find somewhere to put this." Melissa emerged from upstairs, stunning in a white sundress that highlighted her tan. She greeted me with an air kiss near my cheek. "Nancy, you're here already. We're still getting things ready." Her smile didn't reach her eyes. "Timothy, your blue shirt is pressed and hanging in the closet. You should change before people arrive." I stood awkwardly in their grand foyer, unsure where to place myself. "Can I help with anything, Melissa?" "No need. The staff has it under control," she replied, checking something on her phone. "But feel free to make yourself comfortable on the patio. Just be careful not to disturb the table settings." I made my way outside, finding a seat at the edge of the patio. The backyard had been transformed into something from a magazine. String lights hung from perfectly pruned trees, plush outdoor furniture surrounded the gleaming pool, and servers in crisp uniforms arranged appetizer platters on linen-covered tables. Exactly at 2 o'clock, Eleanor and Richard arrived. Eleanor air-kissed Melissa and Timothy, then noticed me with slight surprise. "Nancy, I didn't realize you'd be joining today," she said, her tone making it clear this information would have affected her decision to attend. Richard shook my hand firmly but briefly. "How's that apartment of yours? Still in Westbrook Commons?" "Yes, it's perfect for me," I answered, not mentioning that Westbrook Commons was considered the less desirable part of town. "How was your trip to Italy?" Eleanor launched into details about their month-long European vacation, speaking more to the arriving guests than to me. I nodded politely, increasingly aware of the widening gulf between our worlds. As more guests arrived, Timothy's colleagues in designer polo shirts, Melissa's friends with their perfectly highlighted hair, neighbors driving luxury vehicles, I felt increasingly invisible. I attempted to join conversations about stock portfolios and vacation properties, but participants would politely listen for a moment before subtly shifting away or changing topics. During one conversation about international travel, I mentioned my one trip abroad, a budget tour of England 20 years ago that I'd saved 3 years to afford. "How quaint," remarked one of Melissa's friends, exchanging glances with another guest. "We're actually taking the children to London this fall, but staying at Claridge's, of course. Anything less in that part of Mayfair is simply unbearable." Timothy, overhearing this exchange, quickly interjected, "Mom hasn't had many opportunities to travel. Her work kept her quite busy." His tone carried an apologetic quality that stung worse than the woman's condescension. As the afternoon progressed, I found myself increasingly isolated. I overheard Melissa complaining to her friend Laura, near the outdoor bar. "Timothy's mother insists on coming to everything," she whispered, unaware I was around the corner. "She brought a homemade potato salad to a catered event. It's embarrassing." "Parents can be so clueless," Laura replied sympathetically. "Richard's mother still wears clothes from the 90s to our events." Their laughter felt like tiny daggers. I retreated to the bathroom, fighting back tears and questioning whether I should simply make an excuse and leave. But my desire to spend time with Timothy kept me there, hoping for just a few minutes of genuine connection with my son. By dinner time, the patio tables were arranged for the meal. I found my assigned seat between two strangers, a neighbor I hadn't met and one of Timothy's junior colleagues. Timothy sat at the opposite end with Melissa, her parents, and what appeared to be the most important guests. The physical distance felt symbolic of our relationship. The caterer served grilled salmon, asparagus, and roasted potatoes. My potato salad remained nowhere in sight, presumably hidden away in the kitchen or perhaps discarded altogether. I ate quietly, attempting occasional conversation with my table companions, who responded politely but briefly before returning to their phones or speaking across me to others. As dessert was being served, I noticed Timothy smiling and engaged in animated conversation with Richard. It warmed my heart to see him happy, reminding me of his childhood enthusiasm. Without thinking, I spoke up during a brief lull in table conversations. "Timothy was always so expressive even as a little boy," I said fondly. "When he was 7, he set up a business office in our living room and would wear his little clip-on tie during pretend phone calls." Several guests chuckled politely, but Timothy's smile vanished. Eleanor raised an eyebrow while Richard cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Mom," Timothy said sharply, "no one needs childhood stories right now. I just thought it was sweet how you always knew you wanted to be in business," I explained, feeling the mood shift. "I'm so proud of what you've accomplished." "Yes, well, speaking of business," Richard interjected, clearly trying to move past my comment. "That Powell acquisition looks promising." But something had changed in Timothy's demeanor. His jaw was tight, his shoulders tense. I recognized the signs of his building frustration, a trait he'd had since childhood. The conversation around the table resumed, but Timothy remained silent, occasionally shooting glances in my direction. I felt the weight of his disapproval and struggled to understand what I'd done wrong. Was sharing a fond memory truly so inappropriate? Had I embarrassed him by mentioning his childhood dreams? The confusion and hurt swirled inside me as I pushed my dessert around the plate, no longer hungry. As the dinner plates were being cleared, I made one last attempt to salvage the evening. Raising my water glass, I offered what I thought would be a harmless toast. "I'd just like to say how wonderful it is to be here with Timothy and Melissa in their beautiful home." I began, my voice slightly trembling. "As a mother, there's no greater joy than seeing your child succeed and find happiness. Timothy, from the moment you were born, I knew you were destined for great things." The table fell uncomfortably silent. Timothy's face flushed red, his knuckles whitening around his knife handle. Melissa stared fixedly at her plate while Eleanor and Richard exchanged pointed glances. "Mom," Timothy said through clenched teeth, "this isn't the time for speeches." "I'm sorry," I replied, confused by his reaction. I just wanted to express how proud I am of you. You're making a scene, he hissed, loud enough for nearby guests to hear. Tears pricked at my eyes. I don't understand why sharing my pride in you is making a scene. This is exactly what I'm talking about, Timothy said, his voice rising. You always get emotional and make everything about your feelings. I'm not being emotional, I protested, even as I felt a tear escape. I'm just saying I'm proud of my son. What's wrong with that? Several guests shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Melissa's friend Laura whispered something to her husband, who nodded with an expression of second-hand embarrassment. Timothy abruptly stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the patio stones. The conversation around the table died completely as all eyes turned to us. My heart pounded as Timothy walked around the table toward me. Mom, you're clearly upset, he said loudly, taking hold of my arm. Let's get you some air. I'm fine, Timothy, I insisted, trying to pull away as he urged me to stand. Please let go of my arm. But he continued pulling me up from my seat, guiding me away from the table toward the pool area. I was acutely aware of every guest watching this uncomfortable scene unfold. Timothy, stop this right now, I whispered urgently. You're embarrassing both of us. I'm embarrassing us, he replied incredulously. You're the one getting teary-eyed over nothing and bringing up baby stories at a business dinner. We reached the edge of the pool, the water glimmering under the string lights. I tried again to free my arm from his grip. I think you need to cool off, Mom, Timothy said, suddenly loud enough for everyone to hear. Before I could process what was happening, I felt his hands on my shoulders. With a quick push, I lost my balance and tumbled backward into the pool. The shock of cold water enveloped me as I plunged fully clothed into the deep end. Water filled my nose and mouth as I struggled to orient myself. My clothes immediately became heavy, dragging me down momentarily before I managed to kick my way to the surface. I emerged sputtering and gasping, my hair plastered to my face, makeup surely streaming down my cheeks. And then I heard laughter. Not just from Timothy but from around the patio. Through water-blurred vision, I could see guests covering their mouths, shoulders shaking with amusement. Melissa was giggling behind her napkin. Even Eleanor and Richard were smiling, clearly entertained by my humiliation. Mom needed to cool down a bit, Timothy announced to appreciative chuckles. She gets overheated sometimes. I treaded water in shock, unable to process what had just happened. My own son had physically pushed me into a pool to amuse his friends and in-laws. The blouse I'd carefully selected was ruined, my dignity shattered. Timothy, I gasped, struggling to keep afloat in my waterlogged clothes. Help me out. But he had already turned away, rejoining the table where he was met with approving laughter and back slaps. Not a single person stood up to help me. Eventually, I made my way to the pool steps and climbed out on my own, water streaming from my clothes and forming puddles on the expensive stonework. Melissa finally approached, offering a small hand towel with a poorly concealed smirk. The guest bathroom is down the hall, she said, as though I'd merely spilled a drink on myself rather than been deliberately pushed into a pool. Shivering and dripping, I made my way through the patio doors. Behind me, I heard conversation resuming, punctuated by occasional laughter and someone saying, "Did you see her face when she came up?" In the hallway, I passed a mirror and caught sight of my reflection, hair flattened, makeup streaked, clothes clinging to my body. But worse than my physical appearance was the look in my eyes. The raw hurt and bewilderment of someone who's been betrayed by the person they trusted most in the world. I locked myself in the guest bathroom, sinking to the floor as the full weight of what had just happened crashed over me. My son, the baby I had nursed, the child I had sacrificed everything for, the man I had devoted my life to raising, had publicly humiliated me for the entertainment of people who looked down on me. And he had done it without a moment's hesitation or a flicker of remorse. The realization broke something fundamental inside me. Through the bathroom door, I could still hear the party continuing uninterrupted. No one had come to check if I was all right. No one cared. To them, to Timothy, I was nothing more than an embarrassing prop, useful only for momentary amusement. As I sat there on the cold tile floor, soaking wet and utterly alone, a strange calm began to replace my initial shock. This wasn't just about tonight. This was about years of subtle dismissals, of growing disrespect, of Timothy increasingly treating me as an inconvenience rather than his mother. I had been making excuses for his behavior, telling myself it was just a phase or the natural result of his social climbing. But the truth was now undeniable, and it sat heavy in my chest. The son I had raised no longer valued me as a person worthy of basic dignity and respect. I remained in the bathroom for what felt like hours, though the clock on my phone showed only 20 minutes had passed. My clothes clung uncomfortably to my skin, and my shoes squelched with each movement. The sounds of the party continued outside: music, laughter, the clink of glasses, all carrying on as if nothing had happened. Sitting on the edge of the bathtub, I stared at my reflection in the vanity mirror. The woman looking back at me seemed like a stranger, defeated, diminished, dripping with pool water and humiliation. This wasn't who I was. This wasn't who I had raised my son to treat with such callous disregard. I thought back to the countless nights I'd stayed up with Timothy when he had fevers as a child. The time I'd worked double shifts for 3 months straight to pay for the computer he needed for school projects. The Christmas I'd skipped meals for weeks to afford the bike he desperately wanted. The college application fees I'd covered by selling my mother's antique silver. The down payment for his first condo that had drained my retirement savings. For 37 years I had put Timothy first. And today he had pushed me into a pool for a laugh. My phone buzzed with a text from my friend Barbara. "How's the fancy barbecue going?" The simple question unleashed a flood of emotions. Before I could reconsider, I was calling her, stepping into the shower stall for privacy in case someone came to the door. "Nancy? I thought you'd be enjoying yourself," Barbara answered cheerfully. "He pushed me into the pool," I whispered, my voice breaking. "Timothy pushed me into the pool in front of everyone." "He did what?" Barbara's outrage was immediate and validating. Why would he do something so cruel? Through stifled sobs, I recounted the entire humiliating experience. The dismissive treatment throughout the day, my innocent toast, Timothy's anger, and the final shocking push that sent me plunging into the water while guests laughed. "Nancy, listen to me," Barbara said firmly when I finished. "You need to get out of there right now. Come to my house. This is abuse, plain and simple. I don't care if he's your son. No one has the right to treat you this way." "I don't want to make a scene," I replied weakly, the irony of my words not lost on me. "He already made the scene," Barbara countered. "He humiliated his mother who sacrificed everything for him. This isn't about your dignity anymore, it's about his complete lack of it." Her words struck a chord. This wasn't just about my feelings being hurt. This was about recognizing a pattern of disrespect that had been building for years. I had been making excuses for Timothy's behavior, telling myself it was just a phase or that he was under pressure from work or his in-laws. But the truth was simpler and more painful. He no longer valued me. "You're right," I said finally. "I'm leaving. Do you want me to pick you up?" Barbara offered. "No, I need the walk to clear my head," I replied, making my decision. "My house is only a mile away. I'll be fine." After hanging up, I dried myself as best I could with hand towels. My clothes remained damp, but I had no alternative. I gathered my dignity, slipped out of the bathroom, and made my way through the house without returning to the patio. No one noticed me leaving. No one called out. No one cared. The walk home in squelching shoes gave me time to process my emotions. At first there was just hurt, raw and overwhelming. Then came waves of anger, not hot and explosive but cold and clarifying. By the time I reached my small ranch house, my mind had moved beyond emotion to something more resolute: determination. Inside my home, the modest house I'd moved to after selling our family home to pay for Timothy's education, I peeled off my wet clothes and stepped into a hot shower. As the warm water washed away the chlorine, I found myself crying again. But these weren't tears of humiliation. They were tears of mourning for the relationship I had believed in, for the son I thought I knew, for the decades of sacrifice that had culminated in such betrayal. After my shower, I wrapped myself in a robe and sat at my kitchen table, my mind replaying instances I had previously dismissed. Timothy cutting phone calls short with transparent excuses. His reluctance to introduce me to new friends. The Christmas gift last year. A self-help book about aging gracefully. that felt more like a criticism than a present. I remembered the time he'd corrected my pronunciation of charcuterie at a dinner party, his wince when I mentioned shopping at discount stores, his visible relief when I declined to attend a work function with him. Each memory built upon the last, creating a pattern I had willfully ignored for too long. The realization that truly broke my heart was this: I had enabled his behavior. By accepting small disrespects, by making excuses for his growing coldness, by prioritizing his comfort over my dignity, I had taught Timothy that treating me poorly was acceptable. My unconditional love had somehow transformed into unconditional tolerance of mistreatment. Barbara called again around 6 o'clock to check on me. "Have you heard from him?" she asked. "Has he apologized?" "Not a word," I replied, glancing at my silent phone. "He hasn't even noticed I left." "Nancy, I've been thinking," Barbara said carefully. "There's something else bothering me about all this. Timothy has always been ambitious, but this feels different. This level of disrespect, this public humiliation, it's like he wanted to make a statement to those people that you don't matter to him." Her observation resonated with something that had been nagging at the edges of my consciousness. Timothy's behavior today wasn't just rude, it was performative. He wasn't just ignoring me. He was actively demonstrating to his guests that I was insignificant. "You know," I said slowly, "about 3 months ago, I was helping him organize some files in his home office while he and Melissa were on vacation. I found some financial documents that didn't make sense, reports showing much higher returns than the supporting paperwork justified." "What are you saying?" Barbara asked. At the time, I convinced myself I was misunderstanding something. I even mentioned it casually to Timothy when they returned, and he dismissed it as complicated financial strategies that I wouldn't understand. The memory stung with fresh significance now. "Barbara, I think Timothy might be involved in something unethical at work." "And you think he's worried you know too much?" Barbara suggested. "Or that I might say something that raises questions," I agreed. One of his guests tonight was Martin Walsh, his direct supervisor at Lambert Financial. As we continued talking, pieces began falling into place. Timothy's increasing efforts to distance himself from me coincided with his rapid rise at the company. His sudden promotion last year had surprised even him. The new house, the luxury car, the exclusive social circle, all acquired more quickly than his official salary would seem to allow. After hanging up with Barbara, I went to my small home office where I kept copies of important documents. Years of single motherhood had taught me to be organized and prepared. In a folder marked Timothy Tax Information, I found copies of the statements I'd seen in his home office, documents I'd photographed with my phone out of motherly concern, intending to ask a financially savvy friend to explain them to me. Looking at them now with fresh eyes, the discrepancies were obvious even to my untrained understanding. Dates that didn't align. Numbers that magically increased between reports. Client accounts with suspiciously identical growth patterns. As the evening progressed, my hurt gradually transformed into something else. Clarity. Timothy hadn't just betrayed me as a son today. He had potentially betrayed his professional ethics, his company's trust, and possibly even the law. And in pushing me away so aggressively, he had revealed just how desperate he was to maintain his facade. By 9 o'clock, I had made my decision. This wasn't just about standing up for myself anymore. This was about holding Timothy accountable before his choices led him further down a destructive path. Sometimes the most loving thing a parent can do is to stop protecting their child from the consequences of their actions. With steady hands, I began preparing for what I needed to do next. I changed into my best outfit, a navy blue dress I saved for special occasions. I gathered the financial documents and placed them in a folder. I selected several photographs from our lives together. Timothy's graduation, his wedding day, the day we moved him into his first apartment. Standing before my mirror, I practiced what I would say, focusing not on my hurt but on the clear, calm delivery of truth. This would not be an emotional confrontation but a necessary intervention, the kind that true love sometimes demands. Timothy had pushed me into the pool to silence and humiliate me. But in doing so, he had freed me from the fear of losing his approval. I had already lost my son's respect. But perhaps through my actions tonight, I might help him find his way back to the person I had raised him to be. By 9:30 I was ready. My hair was perfectly styled, my makeup carefully applied, and my resolve unshakable. The navy blue dress, purchased for a colleague's retirement party last year, gave me an air of dignity that my earlier outfit had lacked. Around my neck hung the small gold locket Timothy had given me for my 50th birthday, containing his childhood photo. A reminder of why this confrontation was necessary. I gathered my materials, the financial documents, family photographs, and a small notebook where I'd organized my thoughts, into a leather portfolio Barbara had gifted me years ago. Before leaving, I called her one last time. "Are you sure about this?" she asked, concern evident in her voice. "You don't have to go back there tonight. This could wait until tomorrow when you've had more time to process." "If I wait, I might lose my courage," I replied honestly. "And Timothy needs to understand that actions have consequences. Not tomorrow, not next week, but immediately. Do you want me to come with you?" Barbara offered. I considered this briefly but shook my head, though she couldn't see it. "No. This is between my son and me. But thank you for being ready to support me. Call me the second you leave there," she insisted. "No matter what time." The drive back to Lakeside Heights took only 12 minutes, but it felt like crossing a significant threshold. Each mile brought me closer to a confrontation I had spent decades avoiding. As a mother, I had always sought to protect Timothy from disappointment, from hardship, from consequences. Tonight, I would protect him from something far more dangerous, the belief that character and integrity were negotiable. When I arrived at Timothy's house, the party was still in full swing. More cars lined the circular driveway than before, suggesting additional guests had arrived in my absence. Music and laughter spilled from the backyard. Through the large windows, I could see people mingling in the living room, drinks in hand, entirely unaware of the significance this evening held. I parked on the street and approached the front door with measured steps. My heart raced, but my determination remained steady. This was not about vengeance or humiliation. This was about truth and accountability, the foundations of any meaningful relationship. Instead of ringing the doorbell, I used the key Timothy had given me years ago. "For emergencies only," he'd specified. This qualified as an emergency of the spirit, if not the body. The entryway was empty, though voices and music echoed from the backyard. I moved through the house with purpose, straightening my shoulders and lifting my chin. When I stepped onto the patio, the reaction was immediate and gratifying. A ripple of shocked silence spread outward from the point of my appearance. Timothy, holding court near the outdoor bar, froze mid-sentence when he spotted me. His face cycled through expressions rapidly: surprise, confusion, embarrassment, and finally anger. "Mom," he said loudly, placing his drink down with unnecessary force. "What are you doing back here?" The attention of every guest turned toward us. I remained in the doorway, calm and composed. "I believe we have unfinished business, Timothy," I replied, my voice clear and carrying across the suddenly quiet patio. Timothy strode toward me, his face flushed. Melissa followed a few steps behind, anxiety written across her features. "This isn't a good time," he hissed when he reached me. "You're clearly still upset about earlier. We can talk tomorrow." "No, Timothy," I said firmly. "We'll talk now. I've spent 37 years putting your needs before mine. Tonight, you can spare me 5 minutes. "Mom, you're being ridiculous," he said, attempting to guide me back into the house away from curious eyes. I stood my ground. "I'd like to address everyone, actually." "Absolutely not," Timothy snapped, his voice rising. "You're not going to make another scene. I believe you already created the scene when you pushed your mother into a pool." I replied calmly. "I'm simply here to provide context." Melissa stepped forward, her smile tight and artificial. "Nancy, we're in the middle of entertaining. Perhaps we could schedule a time to talk privately?" "This won't take long," I assured her, then raised my voice slightly. "May I have everyone's attention for just a moment?" "Mom, stop this right now," Timothy demanded, panic edging into his voice. From across the patio, an unexpected ally emerged. Richard, Melissa's father, stepped forward. "Let her speak, Timothy," he said, his authoritative tone brooking no argument. "If Nancy has something to say, we should hear it." Timothy's jaw clenched, but he fell silent. Eleanor joined her husband, curiosity evident in her expression. Around the patio, guests settled into attentive silence. Drinks paused midway to lips, conversation suspended. "Thank you, Richard," I said, nodding graciously in his direction. "I won't take much of your time." I moved to the center of the patio, portfolio clutched in my hands. Timothy remained frozen, his expression a mixture of fury and fear. Melissa retreated to stand beside her mother, uncertainty clouding her perfect features. "Many of you witnessed what happened earlier today," I began, my voice steady despite my racing heart. "My son pushed me into the pool during dinner, suggesting I needed to cool off. It was humiliating, as I'm sure was the intention." Uncomfortable glances were exchanged among the guests. Some had the grace to look ashamed of their earlier laughter. "I'm not here for apologies or to create drama," I continued. "I'm here because sometimes love requires difficult truths. And the truth is, what happened today was merely a symptom of a much larger problem." I opened my portfolio and removed a photograph, Timothy at his college graduation, beaming with pride as I stood beside him. "This is the son I raised," I said, holding the image up. "A bright, ambitious young man with tremendous potential. A young man who understood that character and integrity were non-negotiable foundations for success." Timothy stepped forward. "Mom, that's enough. You're embarrassing yourself." "No, Timothy," irraplia quietly. "For perhaps the first time in your adult life, I'm not enabling you. There's a difference." I turned back to the assembled guests. "What most of you don't know is that I sold my family home, the only significant asset I had, to pay for Timothy's education at Westbridge. I worked 3 jobs during his childhood to ensure he had every opportunity one didn't. When he graduated, I gave him my retirement savings for the down payment on his first condo." Timothy's face paled. "This is inappropriate. My financial history is private." "Is it?" I asked, removing the folder of financial documents from my portfolio. "Then perhaps we should discuss more recent financial matters." The change in Timothy's expression was immediate, and alarming fear replacing anger. From the corner of my eye, I noticed Martin Walsh, Timothy's supervisor, straightening in his chair, his attention sharpening. 3 months ago, while helping organize Timothy's home office, I discovered some concerning discrepancies in financial reports. I continued, my voice even. Returns that didn't match underlying documentation. Client accounts with identical growth patterns despite different investment strategies. Dates that didn't align between internal and external reports. A heavy silence fell over the gathering. Martin Walsh stood up, his expression grave. "At the time, I convinced myself I must be misunderstanding complex financial matters," I said. When I mentioned it to Timothy, he dismissed my concerns and suggested I wouldn't understand such sophisticated strategies. Timothy lunged forward, reaching for the folder. "Give me those. You have no idea what you're talking about." I stepped back, keeping the documents out of his reach. "I took copies, Timothy, because despite everything, I'm still your mother, and I was worried about you." "You had no right," he hissed, color draining from his face. "I had every right," I countered. "Just as I have the right to be treated with basic dignity and respect. 2 things that seem to have become optional in your value system lately." Martin Walsh approached us, his expression unreadable. "Timothy, what exactly is your mother referring to?" "Nothing," Timothy said quickly. "She's confused. Upset about a stupid joke earlier." "I'm neither confused nor particularly upset anymore," I clarified, handing the folder to Martin. "I'm simply no longer willing to be complicit through my silence." Martin took the folder, opening it to scan the first few pages. His expression hardened as he flipped through the documents. "We should discuss this in private," he said finally, closing the folder. "Of course," I agreed. "I didn't come here to destroy Timothy's career or reputation. I came because I love my son too much to watch him destroy himself." I turned to face Timothy directly, looking into the eyes of the boy I had raised, the man he had become. "I didn't raise you to treat people as disposable," I said quietly. "I didn't raise you to value status over integrity. And I certainly didn't raise you to push your mother into a pool for a laugh." The silence around us was profound. Melissa's parents exchanged glances, their earlier amusement at my expense now replaced with grave concern. Guests shifted uncomfortably, some discreetly gathering purses and jackets, sensing the party had reached an unexpected conclusion. Timothy stared at me, his expression a complex mixture of rage, fear, and something else, perhaps the first glimmer of recognition that actions have consequences. "You've ruined everything," he said, his voice barely audible.
"No, Timothy," irreplied sadly.
"You did that yourself. I'm just refusing to help you pretend otherwise any longer." With those words I closed my portfolio, nodded respectfully to Richard and Eleanor, and turned to leave. As I walked through the house toward the front door, I heard the murmur of voices rising behind me, questions being asked, explanations demanded. I had done what was necessary not as an act of revenge, but as an act of love. True love sometimes requires difficult truths and painful consequences. It was a lesson I should have taught Timothy long ago. As I reached the front door, I heard rapid footsteps behind me. Timothy appeared in the hallway, his face contorted with a mixture of panic and fury. "How could you do this to me?" he demanded, blocking my exit. "After everything, how could you betray me like this?" The irony of his accusation wasn't lost on me. I set my portfolio down on the entry table and faced my son directly. "I haven't betrayed you, Timothy. I've stopped betraying myself. You had no right to go through my financial documents," he insisted, lowering his voice as Martin Walsh appeared in the hallway behind him. "No right to make assumptions about things you don't understand." "You're right that I don't understand high finance," I acknowledged. "But I understand right from wrong. I understand that numbers don't magically increase between reports without explanation." Martin cleared his throat. "Timothy, I need to see all the original documents first thing tomorrow morning. 8 a.m. my office." Timothy's shoulders slumped slightly, the first sign that the gravity of the situation was sinking in. "Martin, I can explain everything. There are legitimate strategies at play that might look unusual to untrained eyes." "Then you'll have no problem explaining them tomorrow," Martin replied coolly. 8 a.m. As Martin returned to the patio, Melissa appeared in the hallway, her earlier poise replaced by visible distress. Eleanor and Richard followed close behind, their expressions grim. "What's happening?" Melissa demanded, looking between Timothy and me. "What documents is he talking about?" Before Timothy could answer, the front door opened. Several guests were making discreet exits, murmuring awkward goodbyes. The party was clearly dissolving in the wake of my revelation. "Perhaps we should continue this conversation in private," Richard suggested, his authoritative tone leaving no room for disagreement. Timothy nodded stiffly, leading us into his home office. The very room where I had discovered the troubling documents months ago. The space was impeccably organized, with expensive art on the walls and a large mahogany desk dominating the center. Once the door closed behind us, Eleanor turned to me. "Nancy, exactly what are you accusing Timothy of?" "I'm not making accusations," I replied calmly. "I'm sharing observations. The financial documents I found showed significant discrepancies that concerned me as a mother. I brought those concerns to Timothy, who dismissed them. Tonight, after experiencing how easily he could dismiss me as a person, I realized I couldn't ignore those concerns any longer." "This is ridiculous," Timothy interjected. "Mom found some preliminary worksheets and draft reports. Of course there were differences from the final numbers. She's trying to make me look bad because she's angry about a harmless joke." I reached into my portfolio and removed several family photographs, spreading them on Timothy's desk. "This is you at 5, the day you won your first math competition. This is us at the Grand Canyon. The only vacation we could afford during your childhood, paid for with 6 months of overtime shifts. This is the day we moved you into your college dorm." Timothy stared at the photos, his expression unreadable. "I'm not sharing these to make you feel guilty," I explained. "I'm reminding you of who you are. The boy in these photos understood values. He understood gratitude. He understood that how we treat people matters more than what we own or who we impress." "Nancy," Richard said slowly, "while family history is touching, it doesn't address the serious implications you've raised about Timothy's professional conduct. I nodded. You're right, Richard. The simple truth is this. 3 months ago, I found documents showing Timothy was reporting investment returns to clients that were significantly higher than the actual performance records justified. The dates on internal records didn't match those on client reports, and several client accounts showed identical growth patterns despite supposedly having different investment strategies. Melissa gasped softly. Timothy, tell them that's not true. Timothy's silence was damning. The Lambert Financial Quarterly Review is next week, Martin said from the doorway, having quietly joined our conversation. The Powell acquisition Timothy's been leading is under particular scrutiny because of the unusually high returns projected. Timothy paled visibly. Martin, I can explain everything tomorrow. These are complex strategies. Save it, Martin interrupted. I've seen enough in those documents to warrant a formal investigation. The only question now is whether we handle this internally or involve regulatory authorities. Eleanor placed a protective hand on Melissa's shoulder. I think we should consult our family attorney before this conversation continues. Mom, Dad, it's not what it sounds like, Melissa pleaded, turning to her parents. Timothy wouldn't risk everything we've built. Wouldn't he? I asked gently. He risked our relationship today for a laugh. What else might he risk for status or approval? Timothy slammed his fist on the desk. This is all your fault. You couldn't just let it go, could you? You had to ruin everything because your feelings were hurt. His outburst hung in the air, confirming what I had already understood. Timothy saw no connection between his professional ethical breaches and his personal behavior. Both stemmed from the same fundamental flaw, the belief that rules and respect were optional when they became inconvenient. I didn't ruin anything, Timothy, I said quietly. I merely stopped protecting you from the consequences of your own choices. That's what real love looks like sometimes. Richard cleared his throat. I think Melissa should come stay with us tonight while this situation is sorted out. What? No. Timothy protested. Melissa, tell them that's unnecessary. Melissa looked at her husband with new eyes, uncertain, questioning. Did you really falsify financial reports? Timothy's silence answered her question more definitively than words could have. Oh my God, she whispered, backing toward her parents. What were you thinking? I was thinking about giving you the life you deserve, Timothy replied desperately. The house, the cars, the status, all of it was for us. No, Melissa said, shaking her head. It was for you. I never asked for any of this. As this painful family drama unfolded, I realized my purpose here was complete. I hadn't come to destroy Timothy's marriage or career, only to ensure that truth prevailed over deception. The rest would unfold according to its own natural consequences. I should go, I said quietly, gathering my photographs back into my portfolio. Timothy looked at me, his expression finally shifting from anger to something more vulnerable. The face of the little boy who had once skinned his knee and run to me for comfort. Mom, he said, his voice breaking slightly. What happens now? For the first time that evening, my composure nearly faltered. The question contained such raw uncertainty. The same tone he had used as a child facing consequences for misbehavior. Now you face the truth, Timothy, I answered gently. You take responsibility for your actions. You make amends where possible. You rebuild with integrity what you've damaged through deception. And us? He asked, gesturing between us. What about our relationship? That depends on you. I replied honestly. I'll always be your mother. I'll always love you. But respect is earned, not guaranteed, even between parent and child. As I turned to leave, Martin placed a hand on my shoulder. Mrs. Lambert, thank you for your courage tonight. It couldn't have been easy. It wasn't, I acknowledged. But sometimes the hardest choices are also the right ones. I left Timothy's house that night not in humiliation with dripping clothes, but with my dignity intact and my conscience clear. The path ahead for Timothy would be difficult: professional investigations, possible legal consequences, marital strain. But it was a path that offered the possibility of redemption and growth that his previous trajectory did not. As I drove home, I realized that while I had lost the son I thought I knew, I had perhaps given him the chance to become the man he was meant to be all along. The weeks following that fateful barbecue brought seismic changes to both Timothy's life and mine. The immediate aftermath was painful but necessary, like setting a broken bone so it can heal properly. Timothy was placed on administrative leave pending Lambert Financial's internal investigation. Melissa temporarily moved in with her parents, requesting space to process the revelations about her husband's professional conduct. The beautiful house in Lakeside Heights stood largely empty, a monument to aspirations built on shaky foundations. For 3 days I heard nothing from Timothy. On the 4th morning, he appeared at my door, unshaven and hollow-eyed. "Can I come in?" he asked, his voice rough from what appeared to be several sleepless nights. I stepped aside, allowing him into the modest living room where he had once played with Lego blocks and completed homework assignments. He sat heavily on the couch, staring at his hands. "I've been terminated," he said finally. "Effective immediately." "I'm sorry to hear that," I replied, and meant it. Despite everything, I took no joy in his suffering. "Are you?" he asked, a flash of the old anger surfacing. "This is what you wanted, isn't it? To take me down a peg." "No, Timothy," I said firmly. "What I wanted was for my son to remember that character matters more than status. What I wanted was to be treated with basic respect by the person I sacrificed everything for." He was silent for a long moment. "The Regulatory Commission is investigating now. Martin gave me the option to resign before they fired me. Said it was the only professional courtesy he could extend considering our history." "What does your lawyer say?" I asked practically. "That I should cooperate fully. That restitution looks better than resistance." Timothy ran a hand through his disheveled hair. "Melissa won't take my calls. Her father's friends with the district attorney." "And what do you say?" I asked, the more important question hanging between us. Timothy looked up, meeting my eyes directly for perhaps the first time in years. "I say I screwed up. Badly. Professionally and—" He hesitated. "Personally. With you." It wasn't a full apology, but it was a start and acknowledgement that seemed to pain him physically to make. "Why, Timothy?" I asked softly. "You were raised to know better." He laughed bitterly. "That's the question, isn't it? Why risk everything? Why falsify reports? Why push my mother into a pool?" "Yes," I confirmed. "Those are exactly the questions." "Because it was never enough," he admitted after a long silence. "Each promotion, each social connection, each status symbol. They were supposed to fill something inside me, but they never did. There was always someone with more. Someone more impressed with themselves. Someone who still looked down on me." "Including Melissa's family," I suggested gently. He nodded. "Especially them. Nothing I did ever made them see me as an equal. I was always the scholarship kid who married their daughter." "So you pushed me away," I concluded, "because I reminded you of where you came from." Timothy's eyes filled with tears, the first I had seen since he was a teenager. I was ashamed, not of you, of me. Of the fact that I couldn't feel satisfied with honest success. Of the shortcuts I started taking. "And the pool," I pressed, needing to hear him acknowledge the cruelty directly. He winced visibly. "I wanted Richard's approval more than I wanted your dignity. It's unforgivable." "Not unforgivable," I corrected. "But not something to be dismissed or forgotten either." Over the following months, Timothy's carefully constructed life continued to unravel. The investigation resulted in substantial fines and a permanent mark on his professional record. Several clients filed civil suits. The beautiful house went on the market to cover legal expenses and restitution payments. Melissa filed for separation, though not immediate divorce, a fact that surprised me. During a chance encounter at the grocery store, she explained her reasoning. "I don't know if our marriage will survive this," she admitted, looking tired but somehow more authentic than I'd ever seen her. "But I'm waiting to see who Timothy becomes through this process before I make a final decision." "That's remarkably compassionate," I observed. "I learned it from you, actually," she replied unexpectedly. "The night of the barbecue, you could have publicly humiliated Timothy the way he did you. Instead, you forced him to face consequences out of love. It made me realize I never really knew my husband, or you. My own life transformed in unexpected ways following that night." Without the emotional burden of maintaining a one-sided relationship with Timothy, I found new energy for my own interests. I joined a community art class I'd been eyeing for years, but had never prioritized. I reconnected with old friends I'd neglected in favor of making myself available whenever Timothy might call. Most significantly, I finally launched the small alterations and tailoring business I had dreamed of since my 20s. What began as a few clients from my apartment eventually grew into a small storefront downtown, with a loyal customer base. The skills I had used to patch Timothy's clothes during lean years became the foundation for a modest but fulfilling business of my own. 6 months after the barbecue, Timothy invited me to coffee. He looked different, humbler certainly, but also more authentic. He had found work at a small financial advisory firm, starting at an entry-level position with full disclosure of his past mistakes. "It's honest work," he told me. "For the first time in years, I can sleep at night." "Are you and Melissa working things out?" I asked. "We're in counseling," he replied, "taking it day by day. Her parents are still frosty, but Richard actually recommended me for this job. Said everyone deserves a second chance if they take responsibility." "Wise man," I commented. Timothy nodded, then reached across the table to take my hand. "Mom, I don't expect you to forgive me quickly or easily for how I treated you. But I want you to know I'm working on becoming someone you can be proud of again." "I never stopped being proud of your potential, Timothy," I replied honestly. "I just needed you to start living up to it again." Our relationship has been rebuilding slowly over the past year. We're establishing new patterns based on mutual respect rather than my unconditional accommodation of his disrespect. Timothy and Melissa have moved into a modest condo, living within their actual means for the first time in their marriage. They join me for dinner every other Sunday. Simple meals around my small kitchen table that somehow contain more genuine connection than all the elaborate gatherings in their former home. The journey hasn't been easy. There have been setbacks and difficult conversations. But the foundation is stronger now, built on truth rather than pretense, on earned respect rather than obligatory deference. The most valuable lesson I've learned through all of this is that true love sometimes requires difficult choices. By allowing Timothy to face the natural consequences of his actions rather than protecting him from them, I gave him the opportunity for genuine growth that my previous enabling had denied him. I often think about that moment by the pool, the shock of the cold water, the sting of humiliation, the laughter at my expense. It was painful, yes, but it was also clarifying. Sometimes we need to hit rock bottom before we can see the truth about ourselves and our relationships. If you're facing a similar situation with someone you love, whether a child, a partner, or a friend, remember that enabling their worst behavior isn't kindness. True love has the courage to stand firm in truth, even when that truth is uncomfortable. Your dignity matters. Your respect matters. And sometimes the most loving thing you can do is stop pretending otherwise. What difficult truth have you needed to face in a relationship? Have you ever had to stand up to someone you love? Share your experiences in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more stories about finding strength in difficult situations. Thank you for listening to my journey, and remember, it's never too late to reclaim your dignity and rebuild relationships on healthier foundations.